It is also here that our focused efforts achieve the greatest result as we work within the every center of our circle of influence. We expand it, that is highest leverage PC work, significantly impacting the effectiveness of every aspect of our life. Whatever is at the center of our life will be the source of our security, guidance, wisdoms, and power. Security represents our sense of worth, your identity, your emotional and courage, your self esteem, your basic personal strength or lack of it. Guidance means your source of direction in life encompassed by your map. It is also here that our focused efforts achieve the greatest result as we work within the very center of our circle of influence. We expand it. This is the highest leverage PC work, significantly impacting the effectiveness of every aspect of our life. Whatever is at the center of our life will be the source of our security, guidance, wisdoms, and power. Security represent your sense of worth, your identity, your emotional and courage, your self-esteem, your basic personal stand or lack of it. Guidance means your source of directions in life encompassed by your map, your internal frame of reference that interprets for you what is happening out there, or standards or principles or implicit criteria that govern movement by movement, decision making, and doing. Wisdom is your perspective on life, your sense of balance, your understanding of how the various powers and principles apply and relate to each other. It embraces judgment, discriminant, comprehension. It is gestalt or oneness and integrated wholeness. Power is the faculty or capacity to act, the strength and potency or to accomplish something. It is the vital energy to make choices and decisions. It is also include the capacity to overcome deeply embedded habits and to cultivate higher, more effective ones. These four factors, security, guidance, wisdoms, and powers, are interdependent. Security and clear guidance bring true wisdoms, and wisdom becomes the spark or catalyst to release and direct power. When these four factors are present together, harmonized and will in lived by each other, they create the great force of a noble personality, a balanced character, a beautifully integrated individual. These life supports factors also undergird every other dimensions of life, and none of them is an all or nothing matters the degree to which you have developed. Each one could be charted somewhere on a continuum, much like the maturity continuum described earlier at the bottom, and the four factors are weak. You are basically dependent on circumstance or other people things over which you have no direct control. At the bottom and you are in control. You have independent strength and the foundation for rich interdependent relationship. Your security lies somewhere on the continuum between extreme insecurity on the one hand and wherein your life is buffeted by all the fickle force that play upon it, a deep sense of high intrinsic worth and personal security on the other and your guidance range on the continuum from dependence on the social mirror or the other unstable fluctuating forces to strong inner direction. Your wisdom falls somewhere between a totally inaccurate map where everything is distorted and nothing seems to fit, and a complete and accurate map of life wherein all the parts and principles are properly related to each others. Your power lies somewhere between immobilization or being a puppet pulled by someone else's string to hyperactivity, the power to act according to your own values instead of being acted upon by other people and circumstance. The location of these factors on the continuum, the resulting degree of their integration, harmony, and balance, and their positive impact on every aspect of your life is a function of your center, the basic paradigm at your very core. Alternative centers. Each of us has a center too. We usually don't recognize it as such. Neither do we recognize the all encompassing effect of that center on every aspect of our life. Let's briefly examine several centers or course paradigms people typically have for a better understanding of how they affect these four fundamental dimensions and ultimately the sum of the life that flow from them. Suppose centeredness, marriage can be the most intimate, the most satisfying, the most enduring, growth producing of human relationship. It might seem natural and proper to be centered on one's husband or wife. But experience and observation tells a different story. Over the year, I have been involved in working with many troubled marriages and I have observed a certain trend weaving itself through almost every spouse centered relationship I have encountered. That thread is strong emotional dependence. If your sense of emotional worth comes primarily from our marriage, then we become highly dependent upon that relationship. We become vulnerable to the moods and feelings, the behaviors and treatment of our spouse, or to any external events that may imprint on the relationship, a new child in law, economic setbacks, social success, and so forth. Where when responsibility increase and stress come in the marriage, we tend to revert to the script we were given as we were growing up, but so does our spouse. And those scripts are usually different ways of handling financial child discipline or in-law issues come to the surface when these deep-seated tendencies combines with the emotional dependency in the marriage. The spouse-centered relationship reveals all its vulnerability. When we are dependent on the person with whom we are in conflict, both needs and conflict are compounded. Love, hate, overreaction, fight or flight tendencies, withdrawal, aggressiveness, bitterness, resentment, and cold competition are some of the usual results. When these occur, we tend to fall even further back on background and tendencies and habits in our efforts to justify and defend our own behavior, and we attack our spouse. Inevitably, anytime we are too vulnerable, we feel the need to protect ourselves from further wounds, so we resort to sarcasm, cutting humor, criticism, anything that will keep from exposing the tendencies within each partner tends to wait on the initiative of the other for love only to be tenderness within each partner tends to wait on the initiative of the other for love only to be disappointed but also confirm as to rightness of the accusation made. There is an only phantom security in such a relationship when all appears to be going well. Guidance is based on the emotions of the movement, wisdom and power are lost in the counter dependent negative interaction. Family centeredness, another common center is a family. This too may seems to be natural and proper as an area of focus and deep investment. It provides great opportunities for deep relationship, for loving, for sharing, for much that make life worthwhile. But as center, it ironically destroy the very element necessary to family success. People who are family centered get their sense of security or personal worth from the family tradition and culture or the family reputation. Thus, they become vulnerable to any change in that tradition or culture and to any influence that would affect the reputation. Family centered parents do not have the emotional freedom and the power to raise their children with their ultimate welfare truly in mind if they derive their own security from the family. Their needs to be popular with their children's may override the importance of a long-term investment in their children's growth and development, or they may be focused on the proper and correct behavior of the movement. Any behavior that they consider improper threaten their security. They become upset, guided by the emotions of the movement, spontaneously reacting to the immediate concern rather than the long term growth and development of the child. They may overreact and punish out of bad temper. They tend to love their children conditionally, making them emotionally dependent or counter dependent and rebellious. Money centeredness, another logical and extremely common center to people's life, is making money. Economic security is basic to one's opportunity to do much in any other dimensions in a hierarchy or continuum of needs. Physical survival and financial security comes first. Other needs are not even the even activated until the basic need is satisfied, at least minimally. Most of us face economic worries. Many forces in the wider culture can and do act upon our economic situation, causing or threatening such disruption that we often experience concern and worry that may not always raise to the conscious surface. Sometimes Sometimes there are apparently noble reasons given for making money, such as the desire to take care of one's family, and these things are important, but to focus on money making as a center will bring about its own undoing. Consider again the four life support factors: security, guidance, wisdom, and power. Suppose I derive much of my security from my employment or from my income or net worth. Since many factors affect these economic foundation, I become anxious and uneasy, protective and defensive about anything that may affect them. When my sense of personal worth comes from my net worth, I am vulnerable to anything that will affect that net worth. But work and money per se provide no wisdom, no guidance, and only a limited degree of power and security. All it takes to show the limitation of a money standard is a crisis in many life or in the life of a loved ones. Money centered people often put aside family or other priorities, assuming everyone will understand that economic demands come first. I know one father who was living with his children for a promised trip to the circus. When a phone call came for him to come to work instead, he declined. When his wife suggested that perhaps he should have gone to work, he responded, "The work will come again, but childhood won't." For the rest of their life, his children remember this little act of purity setting not only as an object lesson in their minds but as an expression of love in their hearts. Work centered people may become workaholic, driving themselves to produce at the sacrifice of health, relationship, and other important areas of their lives. Their fundamental identity comes from their work. I'm a doctor, I'm a writer, I'm an actor, because their identity and sense of self worth are wrapped up in their work. Their security is vulnerable to anything that happens to prevent them from continuing in it. Their guidance is a function of the demands of the work. Their wisdom and power come in the limited areas of their work, rendering them ineffective in other areas of life. Possession centeredness, a driving force of many people, is possessions, not only tangible material possessions such as fashionable clothes, homes, cars, boats, jewelry, but also the intangible possessions of fame, glory, and social prominence. Most of us are aware through our own experience how singularly flawed such a center is simply because it can vanish rapidly, but it is influenced by so many forces. If my sense of security lies in my reputation or in the things I have, my life will be in a constant state of threat and jeopardy, that these possessions may be lost or stolen or devalued. If I am in the presence of someone of greater net worth or fame or status, I feel inferior. If I am in the presence of someone of lesser net worth or fame or status, I feel superior. My sense of self-worth constantly fluctuate. I don't have any sense of consistency or encourage or persistence, selfhood. I am constantly trying to protect and ensure my asset properties, securities, positions, and reputation. We have all heard stories of people committing suicide after losing their fortunes in a side stock decline of their fame in a political reversal. Pleasure centeredness, another common center closely allied with possession, is that of fun and pleasure. We live in a world where instant gratification is available and encouraged televisions and movies are major influence in increasing people expectation. They graphically portray what other people have and can do in living the life of ease and fun. But while the glitters of pleasure centered lifestyle and graphically portrayed the natural result of such lifestyle, the impact on the inner person or productivity on relationship is seldom accurately seen. Innocent pleasures in moderation can provide relaxation for the body and mind and can foster family and other relationships, but pleasures per se offers no deep lasting satisfaction or sense of fulfillment. The pleasure centered person, too soon bored with each succeeding level of fun, constantly cries for more and more. So the next new pleasure has to be bigger and better and more exciting with a bigger high. A person in this state becomes almost entirely narcissistic, interpreting all of life in terms of the pleasure it provides to the self here and now. Too many vacations that last too long, too many movies, too much TV, too much video game playing, too much undisciplined leisure time in which a person continually takes the course of least resistance gradually waste a life. It ensures that a person's capacities stay dormant, that talents remain undeveloped, that the mind and spirit becomes lethargic, and that the heart is unfulfilled. Where is the security, the guidance, the wisdom, and the power at the low end of the continuum in the pleasure of a fleeting moment? Malcolm Muggeridge writes a 20th century testimony. When I look back on my life nowadays, which I sometimes do, what strikes me most forcibly about is that what seems at the time most significant and seductive seems now most futile and absurd. For instance, success is all of its various guises, being known and being praised, ostensible pleasures like acquiring money or seducing women or traveling, going to and fro in the world and up and down in it like Shaitan, explaining and experiencing whatever vanity fear has to offer. In retrospect, all these exercise in self gratification seems pure fantasy, what Pascal called licking the earth. Friend enemy centeredness, young people are particularly through certainly not exclusively susceptible to becoming friend centered. Acceptance and belonging to a peer group can become almost supremely important. The distorted and ever changing social mirror becomes the source for the four life support factors, creating a high degree of dependence on the fluctuating moods, feeling, attitudes, and behavior of other. Friend-centeredness can also focus exclusively on one person, taking on some of the dimension of marriage, the emotional dependences on one individual, the escalating needs, conflict spiral, and the resulting negative interaction can grow out of friend-centeredness. And what about putting an enemy at the center of one's life? Most people would never think of it, and probably no one would ever do it consciously. Nevertheless, enemy center is very common, particularly when there is frequent interaction between people who are in real conflict. When someone feels he has been unjustly dealt with by an emotionally or socially significant person, it is very easy for him to become preoccupied with the injustice and make the other person the center of his life rather than proactively leading his own life. The enemy centered person is counterdependently reacting to the behavior and attitude of a perceived enemy. One friend of mine who taught at a university became very distraught because of the weaknesses of a particular administrator with whom he had a negative relationship. He allowed himself to think about the man constantly until eventually it became an obsession. It so preoccupied him that it affected the quality of his relationship with his family, his church, and his working associates. He finally came to the conclusion that he had to leave the university and accept a teaching appointment somewhere else. Wouldn't you really prefer to teach at this university if the men were not here? I asked him. Yes, I would, he responded, but as long as he is here, then my staying is too disruptive to everything in life. I have to go. Why have you made the administrator the center of your life? I asked him. He was shocked by the question. He denied it, but I pointed out to him that he was allowing one individual and his weaknesses to distort his entire map of life, to undermine his faith and the quality of individual and the quality of his relationship with his loved ones. He finally admitted that this individual had had such an impact on him, but he denied that he himself had made all these choices. He attributed the responsibility for the unhappy situation to the administrator. He himself, he declared, was not responsible. As we talked little by little, he came to realize that he was indeed responsible, but that because he did not handle this responsibility well, he was being responsible. Many divorced people fall into a similar pattern. They are still consumed with anger and bitterness and self justification regarding an ex-spouse. In a negative sense. Psychologically, they are still married. They each need the weaknesses of the former partner to justify their accusation. Many older children go through life either secretly or openly hitting their parents. They blame them for past abuses, neglect, or favoritism, and they center their adult life on that hatred, living out the reactive, justifying script that accompanies it. The individual who is friend or enemy center has no intrinsic security, feeling of self-worth or volatile, a function of the emotional state or behavior of other people. Guidance comes from the person perception of how other will respond, and wisdom is limited by the social lens or by an enemy center paranoia. The individual has no power, other people are pulling the strings, church centeredness. I believe that almost anyone who is seriously involved in any church will recognize that church going is not synonymous with personal spirituality. There are some people who get so busy in church worship and project that they become insensitive to the pressing human needs that surround them, contradicting the very percept that profess to believe deeply. There are others who attend the church less frequently or not at all, but whose attitudes and behavior reflect a more genuine centering in the principles of the basic Judeo Christian ethic. Having participated throughout my life in organization, church, and community service groups, I have found that attending church does not necessarily mean living the principles taught in those meetings. You can be active in a church but inactive in its gospel. In the church centered life, image or appearance can become a person's dominant consideration, leading to hypocrisy that undermines personal security and intrinsic worth. Guidance comes from a social conscience, and the church centered person tends to label other artificially in order in terms of active, inactive, liberal, orthodox, or conservative. Because the church is a formal organization made up of policies, programs, practices, people, it cannot by itself give a person any deep permanent security or sense of intrinsic worth. Living the principles taught by the church can do this, but the organization alone cannot. Nor can the church give a person a constant sense of guidance. Church-centered people often tends to live in compartment, acting and thinking and feeling in certain ways on the Sabbath and in totally different ways on weekdays. Such a lack of wholeness or unity or integrity is a further threat to security, creating the needs for increased labeling and self-justifying. Seeing Seeing the church as an end rather than as a means to an end undermines a person's wisdom and sense of blames. Although the church claims to teach people about the source of power, it does not claim to be that power itself. It claims to be one vehicle through which divine power can be channeled into man's nature. Self centeredness, perhaps the most common center today, is the self, the most obvious form of self selfishness which violates the value of most people. But if we look closely at many of the popular approaches to growth and self fulfillment, we often find self centering at their core. There is little security, guidance, wisdom, or power in the limited center of self, like the Dead Sea in Palestine. It accepts but never gives, it becomes stagnant. On the other hand, paying attention to the development of self in the greatest perspective of improving one's ability to serve, to produce, to contribute a meaningful ways gives context for dramatic increase in the four life support factors. They are some of the more common centers from which people approach life. It is often much easier to recognize the centered in some else's life than to see in your own. You probably known someone who puts making money ahead of anything else. You probably known someone whose energy is devoted to justifying his or her position in an ongoing negative relationship. If you looking, you can sometimes see beyond behavior into the center that creates it. Identifying your center, but where do you stand? What is the center of your own life? Sometimes that isn't easy to see. Perhaps the best way to identify your own center is to look closely at your life support factors. If you can identify with one or more of the description below, you can trace it back to the center from which it flew, a center which may be limiting your personal effectiveness If you are spouse center security, your feeling of security are based on the way your spouse trends too. Your spouse treats too. Your feeling of security are based on the way your spouse treats you. You are highly vulnerable to the moods and feeling of your spouse. There is deep disappointment resulting in withdrawal or conflict when your spouse disagrees with you or does not meet your expectation. Anything that may impinge on the relationship perceived as a threat. Guidance. Your direction comes from your own needs and want and from those of your spouse. Your decision making criterion is limited to what you think is best for your marriage or your mate or to the preference and opinions of your spouse. Your decision making criterion is limited to what you think is best for your marriage or your mate or to the preference and opinions of your spouse. Wisdom, your life perspective surrounds things which may positively or negatively influence your spouse or your relationship. Power, your power to act is limited by weakness in your spouse and in yourself. If you are family centered security, your security is founded on family acceptance and fulfilling family expectation. Your sense of personal security is the volatile as the family. Your feeling of self worth are based on the family reputation. Guidance family scripting is your source of correct attitude and behavior. Your decision making criterion is what is good for the family and what family members want. Wisdom. Your interpret all of life in terms of your family, creating a partial understanding in the family narcissism power. Your actions are limited by family models tradition. If you are money centered security, your personal worth is determined by your net worth. You are vulnerable. Your actions are limited by family model traditions. If you are money center security, your personal worth is determined by your net worth. You are vulnerable to anything that threatens your economic security. Guidance profits is your decision making criterion. Wisdom money making is the lens through which life is seen and understood. Creating imbalanced judgment power, you are restricted to what you can accomplish with your money and your limited vision. If you are work centered security, you tend to define yourself by your occupational roles. You are only comfortable when you are working. Guidance, you make your decision based on the needs and expectations of your work. Wisdom, you tend to be limited to your work role. Power, your actions are limited by work role models, organizations, constraints, occupational opportunities, your boss perceptions, and your possible inability at some point in your life to do that particular work. If you are possession centered, security, your security is based on your reputation, your social status, on the tangible things you possess. You tend to compare what you have to what others have. Guidance. You make your decision based on what will protect, increase, or better display your possessions. Wisdom. You see the world in the terms of comparative economics and social relationship power. Your functions. You functions within the limit of what you can buy or the social prominence you can achieve. If you are pleasure center security, you feel secure only when you are on pleasure high. Your security is short lived, anesthetizing and dependent on your environment. Guidance, you make your decision based on what will give you the most pleasure. Wisdom, you see the world in terms of what in it for you. Power, your power is almost negligible. If you are friend centered security, your friends is a function of the social mirror. You are highly dependent on the opinions of other. Guidance, your decision making Criterion is what will they think. You are easily embarrassed. Wisdom, you see the world through a social lens. Your actions are fickle as opinion. Power, you are limited by your social comfort zone. If you are enemy centered, security, you security is volatile based on the movement of your enemy. You are always wondering what he is up to. You seek self justification and validation from the like minded. Guidance, you see counter dependently guided by your enemy action. You make your decision based on what will thwart your enemy. Wisdom, your judgment is narrow and distorted. You are defensive, overreactive, and often paranoid. Power. The little power you do have comes from anger, envy, resentment, and vengeance. Negative energy that shrivels and destroy living energy for little else. If you are church center security, your security is based on church activity and on the esteem in which you are held by those in authority or influence in the church. You find identity and security in religious labels and comparison guidance. You are guided by how others will evaluate your actions in the context of church teaching and expectation. Wisdom, you see the world in terms of believers and non-believers, belongers and non-belongers, and power. Perceive power comes from your church position or role. If you are self-centered security, your security is constantly changing and shifting. Guidance, your judgment criteria are: if it feels good, what I want, what I need, it's what's in it for me. Wisdom, your view the world by how decisions, even circumstance, will affect you. Power, your ability to act is limited to your own resources without the benefits or interdependency more often than not. A person center is some combination of these and or other centers. Most people are very much a functions of a variety of influence that play upon their life depending on external or internal condition. One particular center may be activated until the underlying needs are satisfied, then another center becoming the compelling force. As a person fluctuates from one center to another, the result the resulting relativism is like roller coasting through life. One movement you are high, the next movement you are low, making efforts to compensate for one weakness by borrowing strength from another weakness. There is no consistent sense of direction, no persistent wisdom, no steady power supply or sense of personal intrinsic worth and identity. The ideal of course is to create one clear center from which you consistently drive a high degree of security, guidance, wisdoms, and power, empowering your proactivity and giving congruency and harmony to every part of your life. A principle center. By centering our life on correct principles, we create a solid foundation for development of the four life support factors. Our security comes from knowing that, unlike other center based on people or things which are subject to frequent and immediate change, correct principles do not change. We can depend on them. Principles don't react to anything, they won't divorce us or run away with our best friends. They aren't out to get us. They can't pave our ways with shortcuts and quick fixes. They don't depend on the behavior of others, the environment, or the current fad for their validity. Principles don't die. They aren't here one day and gone the next. They can be destroyed by fire, earthquake, or theft. Principles are deep fundamental truths, classic truths, generic common denominators. They are tightly interwoven threads running with exactness, consistency, beauty, and strength through the fabric of life. Even in the midst of the people or circumstance that seems to ignore the principles, we can be secure in the knowledgeable that principles are bigger than people or circumstance, and that the thousands of years of history have seen them trump time and time again. Even more important, we can be secure in the knowledge that we can validate them in our own life by our own experience. Admittedly, we are not omniscient. Our knowledge and understanding of correct principles is limited by our own lack of awareness of our true nature and the world around us, and by the flood of trendy philosophies and theories that are not in harmony with correct principles. These ideas will have their season of acceptance, but like many before them, they won't endure because they are built on false foundation. We are limited, but we can push back the borders of our limitations, and understanding of the principles of our own growth enable us to search out correct principles with the confidence that the more we learn, the more clearly we can focus the lens through which we see the world. The principles don't change, our understanding of them does. The wisdom and the guidance that accompany principle centered living comes from correct maps from the way things really are, have been, and will be. Correct maps enable us to clearly see where we want to go and how to get there. We can make our decision using the correct data that will make their implementation possible and meaningful. The personal power that comes from principle centered living is the power of a self aware, knowledgeable, proactive individual, unrestricted by the attitudes, behavior, and the actions of others or many, and by many of the circumstances and environmental influence that limit other people. The only real limitation of power is the natural consequences of the principles themselves. We are free to choose our actions based on our knowledge of correct principles, but we are not free to choose the consequences of other actions. Of those actions. Remember, if you pick up one end of the stick, you pick up the other. Principles always have natural consequences attached to them. They are positive consequences when we live in harmony with the principles. They are negative consequences when we ignore them. But because these principles apply to everyone, whether or not they are aware, this limitation is universal. And the more we know of correct principles, the greater is our personal freedom to act wisely. By centering our lives on timeless, unchanging principles, we create a fundamental paradigms of effective living. It is the center that puts all other centers in perspective if you are principle center. Security. Your security is based on correct principles that do not change regardless of external conditions or circumstances. You know that true principles can repeatedly be validated in your own life through your own experience as a measurement of self improvement. Correct principles functions with exactness, consistency, beauty, and strength. Correct principles helps you understand your own development, endowing you with the confidence to learn more, thereby increasing your knowledge and understanding. Your force of security provides you with an immovable, unchanging, unfailing core, enabling you to see change as an existing adventure and opportunity to make significant contribution. Guidance. You are guided by the compass which enables you to see where you want to go and how you will get there. You see accurate data which make your decision both implementable and meaningful. You stand apart from life situation and circumstance and look at the balanced whole. Your decision and action reflect both short and long term consideration and implications. In every situation, you consciously, proactively determine the best alternative, basing decisions on conscience educated by principles. Wisdom, your judgment encompasses a broad spectrum of long term consequences and of reflect a wise balance and quiet assurance. You see things differently and thus you think and act differently from the largely reactive world. You view the world through a fundamental paradigms for effective, provident living. You see the world in terms of what you can do for the world and its people. You adopt a proactive lifestyle seeking to serve and build others. You interpret all of life experience in terms of opportunities for learning and contribution. Your power is limited only by your understanding and observance of natural law and correct principles and by the natural consequences of the principle themselves.